India has always liked to call its foreign policy strategic autonomy. But recently, the meaning of that phrase is being tested like never before. Case in point, India and the Philippines held their first joint sail in August 2025, a move Beijing publicly protested. New Delhi has also been ramping up its defense ties with both the Philippines and Vietnam, shoring up Quad cooperation and rolling out new BrahMos missile systems in contested waters. The question now is whether India can expand its naval reach without alienating its oldest defense partner, Russia, and without provoking a militarized China. We'll explain how a single missile sail and a single patrol change Beijing's risk calculus and what that means for India's relationship with Moscow. Which brings us to the seas themselves, where India's fleet has gone from a background presence to a force China can no longer ignore. India's growing naval footprint. For many years, India's Navy had only a token role in the South China Sea. Its vessels crossed those waters occasionally, usually for courtesy visits or participation in low-profile drills. The message was more about signaling friendship than about displaying combat readiness. Responsibility for standing up to China fell mainly to its Southeast Asian neighbors, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, countries whose smaller budgets and lighter fleets meant they often found themselves outmatched by Beijing's Coast Guard flotillas and fortified island bases. In contrast, India kept its maritime strength focused on the Indian Ocean, a theater where geography naturally gave it the upper hand. Venturing eastward into a region Beijing saw as its own sphere was an ambition talked about often but acted on sparingly. That calculation began to shift in the past year. New Delhi has moved from making symbolic appearances to carrying out deployments that repeat, last longer, and involve real exercises with partners. Indian warships now join regional patrols, adding their hull numbers to multilateral formations from which they were once absent. In August 2025, for example, India took part in its first-ever joint sail with the Philippines, sending the destroyer INS Delhi, the corvette INS Kiltan, and the support ship INS Shakti alongside a Philippine vessel. Those kinds of visible bilateral operations were once extremely rare. Today, they are beginning to form a pattern. This increase does not yet make India's Navy a permanent fixture in the contested sea. Unlike the United States or China, New Delhi has not established the basing network that makes constant rotations possible. Instead, what India has created is a sustained pattern of recurring deployments, operationally significant, politically noticeable, but still constrained. The difference is important. While Beijing's People's Liberation Army Navy can keep forces stationed near the Spratlys year-round, India is signaling intent rather than establishing a full-time guard. Capacity, however, has grown quickly. India commissioned its indigenously built aircraft carrier, an unmistakable sign of ambition to expand blue water operations. Alongside it are the Project 15B destroyers, modern vessels armed with advanced radar suites and long-range cruise missiles. These ships are not only more capable than the older craft they replace, they also allow India to form task groups that can defend themselves at sea rather than relying on coastal protection. That expansion reaches to the Andaman and Nicobar Command as well. These island outposts, sitting much closer to the Strait of Malacca than the Indian mainland, have been reinforced to serve as valuable logistics hubs. From there, Indian ships can stage forward, refuel, and extend their reach into the wider Pacific with far greater efficiency than before. The deployment record reflects these upgrades. Indian frigates and destroyers have begun to appear along sailing routes near the Spratly and Paracel Islands, waters where China's activities and claims are most entrenched. This is not a matter of coincidence. By placing visible naval units in zones of Chinese assertiveness, New Delhi puts itself in the same operational environment where smaller Southeast Asian fleets have absorbed most of the pressure alone. When an Indian escort joins an exercise near Manila or shadows passage routes near Vietnam, the optics change. Beijing now faces a country that brings real naval mass into those waters. For regional capitals, that shift creates a mixed reaction. Manila and Hanoi in particular welcome the presence. The Philippines has repeatedly complained of Chinese harassment of its resupply missions, while Vietnam has spent decades in tense maritime standoffs. Having Indian ships alongside them reassures domestic audiences and broadens the balance at sea. Yet there is a flip side. Crowded waters combined with modern, heavily armed vessels raise the stakes of every close encounter. What might once have been a collision between two? Patrol craft could now involve advanced surface combatants, a scenario none of the smaller states wants to see escalate. It is in China where these deployments are felt most keenly. Beijing has spent more than a decade turning its artificial islands into mini-fortresses, brushing off international rulings that questioned its claims. Every Indian ensign that appears in those waters complicates China's picture of control. Is one thing to manage familiar challenges from U.S. naval patrols, is another to account for a rival that not only shares a disputed land border with China, but is also now active in contested maritime zones. This adds an additional player to Beijing's strategic equations and chips away at its claim of being the only major Asian power in the region. But can India keep ships on station long enough to truly alter Beijing's approach? This is the core problem of sustainability. Unlike the United States, India cannot call upon a global logistics chain of allied bases and refueling points. Every patrol requires complex planning for fuel, crew, maintenance, and resupply, especially as the distance from Mumbai or Chennai stretches across thousands of kilometers. The Andaman and Nicobar facilities help lessen the pressure, but they are not comparable to China's hardened island runways and hangars right on the South China Sea's doorstep. For now, India can maintain months-long deployments, but it still lacks the infrastructure for continuous, year-round presence. Nevertheless, the strategic effect arrives long before absolute parity is reached. Smaller neighbors now have a partner close enough to shift the local balance. Where once Beijing could rely on confronting Manila or Hanoi one-on-one, it must now consider that New Delhi can enter the picture directly. That added uncertainty strengthens the bargaining position of every Southeast Asian capital. For India, this is leveraged not only in the maritime domain, but also in diplomatic conversations across Asia and beyond. So far, India's approach has been measured rather than reckless. It is demonstrating that it can appear regularly, operate alongside others, and contribute credible assets to the wider regional equation. Even without replicating the plan's permanence, the fact that an Indian destroyer might round the Spratlys or berth at Da Nang shapes decision-making in Beijing. At the same time, it elevates India in the eyes of Southeast Asian states they're searching for dependable partners. That recognition is a gain in its own right, setting India apart from being seen as merely a distant observer. The unanswered question is how these new patterns intertwine with India's choice of partners. Building genuine relevance in the South China Sea requires more than showing up. It requires forging ties that carry military, political, and symbolic weight with those most affected. And here, India has made deliberate decisions that point to a new kind of alignment, one centered on two familiar but strategically sensitive names. Why the Philippines and Vietnam matter to India. India's decision to deepen defense partnerships with the Philippines and Vietnam was not random. It was carefully calculated. Both countries sit on the front line of disputes with Beijing, and each brings a different kind of value to New Delhi's long-term strategy in the South China Sea. In recent years, India has moved beyond symbolic gestures by formalizing structured ties, elevating relations with Manila into a strategic partnership in August 2025, joined by the first joint sail inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone from August 1st to 4th, and expanding cooperation with Hanoi through energy, maritime, and logistics agreements that build on years of steady engagement. These moves are consistent with India's growing determination to shift from observer to participant. For Manila, the logic is immediate. Its small, overstretched navy faces persistent harassment from China around hotspots such as Scarborough Shoal and the Second Thomas Shoal. Philippine vessels are routinely shadowed or rammed by Chinese ships, leaving local forces unable to push back effectively on their own. While the United States remains the Philippines' treaty ally, its enforcement of those commitments has ebbed and flowed depending on Washington's internal politics. By aligning with India, Manila adds another layer of support. Rather than replacing the U.S. role, India offers advanced weaponry, joint exercises, and political recognition, parallel measures that supplement American guarantees and make it more difficult for Beijing to isolate any single partner. Hanoi, by contrast, is defined less by external appeals and more by history. From a 1979 border conflict to repeated maritime standoffs over oil and fisheries, Vietnam has resisted Chinese pressure directly for decades. That record resonates in New Delhi, where policymakers see parallels in their own clashes with China along the Himalayas. Shared experience of conflict with a stronger neighbor has fostered a natural sympathy and trust between the two governments. By deepening naval cooperation with Vietnam, including regular port calls in Da Nang and logistics access agreements, India strengthens ties with a partner that will not shy away from confrontation if pushed. these relationships are not built on promises of permanent Indian deployments in contested waters. Instead, they revolve around cooperation through port access, reciprocal visits, defense technology transfers, coordinated drills, and shared training programs. For the Philippines, the most concrete symbol of this cooperation is the arrival of BrahMos cruise missile systems. India has exported shore-based BrahMos batteries under a $375 million contract announced earlier, with deliveries beginning in April 2024 and continuing into 2025. By mid-2025, at least 2 batteries had been transferred, immediately boosting Manila's coastal defenses. For the first time, the Philippines possesses a supersonic missile capable of credibly deterring large vessels near disputed shoals. Every shipment also represents India marking its presence in the region without stationing personnel long-term. In Vietnam's case, the progress has been less about individual weapon systems and more about frameworks. India and Vietnam now conduct joint naval exercises on a regular schedule, allowing Indian frigates and destroyers to practice maneuvers alongside Vietnamese patrol craft. Training programs have widened too, with Vietnamese officers enrolling in Indian naval academies and Indian personnel rotating through Hanoi-based exchanges. What emerges is an ecosystem of habits that gradually integrate the two militaries, personal relationships and operational familiarity that extend further than signed agreements. Hanoi, in turn, provides New Delhi with critical advantages: intelligence sharing on Chinese deployments, the possibility of future port access, and a partner whose political calculus is openly skeptical of Beijing's intentions. These cooperative steps have already played out in exercises. Near the Philippines, simulations have rehearsed Indian warships coordinating with local patrol boats to secure shipping lanes through areas shadowed by Chinese vessels. Near Vietnam, drills have included anti-submarine warfare scenarios and coastal defense maneuvers, reflecting Vietnam's concern over Chinese undersea activity just off its shores. Far from symbolic, these activities demonstrate operational linkages that China cannot dismiss as routine port calls. For Beijing, the optics are unmistakable. The South China Sea is not just another maritime theater, it is central to China's grand strategy, trade routes, and regional power projection. The presence of BrahMos missile batteries in the Philippines introduces a real anti-ship capability into contested waters, one supplied by a rival along China's land border. Meanwhile, India appearing in exercises along Vietnam's coastline reminds Beijing that its neighbors are not isolated but increasingly tied to outside players with the capacity to complicate Chinese calculations. The practical effect is an expanded set of unknowns for Chinese commanders, who must now account for Indian-supplied weapons and operational partnerships alongside U.S. and local forces. For India, the benefit lies in transforming rhetoric about partnership into a visible role in regional security. Historically, its attention gravitated westward toward Pakistan and northward toward its land frontier with China, while the Eastern Maritime Front was treated as secondary. Expanding engagement with Manila and Hanoi signals a shift. New Delhi has placed stakes directly into the South China Sea, through partnerships, through material assets, and through repeated operational presence. Whereas in the past India could issue diplomatic statements in ASEAN discussions while remaining distant, it now shoulders more direct responsibility. Its credibility rests not just on words, but on capabilities embedded in the region. Choosing to focus on the Philippines and Vietnam also underscores India's willingness to step into more demanding partnerships. Less confrontational options existed. Thailand and Malaysia, both balancing between Beijing and Washington, could have provided India with easier relationships without the same exposure to tension. Yet officials in New Delhi judged that demonstrating relevance in the Indo-Pacific required operating with those most exposed to China's maritime assertiveness. By proving its capacity to play a meaningful role in the toughest environments, India shows regional states and extra-regional powers alike that it can make substantive contributions beyond symbolism. This comes with real risks. If Philippine outposts come under renewed blockade or if Vietnamese vessels clash at sea again, India's support will face a test. Supplying hardware and engaging in exercises helps strengthen deterrence, but when push comes to shove, Manila and Hanoi may expect India to respond in ways that New Delhi may find difficult. That uncertainty is part and parcel of being an invested partner. Aligning so closely with both capitals reinforces India's new position not as a distant observer, but as a security stakeholder. For Southeast Asian states wary of Chinese power, India's presence brings assurance. For Beijing, It is evidence that the chessboard is becoming more complicated, with rivals multiplying where once the field felt more predictable. And for India itself, the partnerships with the Philippines and Vietnam rank among the clearest signals, yet that it is ready to anchor itself further east, taking on risks to gain influence. What ties these developments together is not only naval cooperation or political rhetoric, but also the introduction of concrete capabilities into contested zones. Among them, one system stands out for both its symbolism and its operational impact, an Indian-built supersonic missile now deployed at one of the most volatile maritime flashpoints on Earth. BrahMos in contested waters. A new factor now sits on the literal shoreline of the South China Sea, the BrahMos coastal defense batteries supplied by India to the Philippines. These are not symbolic patrol boats or diplomatic texts. They are supersonic cruise missiles under the direct control of the Philippine Marine Corps, positioned to target high-value warships in waters where disputes have often been fought with fishing vessels and Coast Guard cutters. At supersonic speed, BrahMos cuts down reaction times and forces navies to account for the very real risk of sudden, high-end strike capability. Even a handful of launchers alters the way Chinese commanders calculate risk before sending ships into contested zones. What makes the BrahMos tactically significant is its design. It flies at roughly Mach 2.8 to 3, several times faster than most subsonic cruise missiles. The export variants supplied to Manila carry a range of around 290 kilometers to stay within international agreements, but India itself has developed extended range versions capable of striking targets at several hundred kilometers. In fact, New Delhi cleared procurement of BrahMos Yar regiments in 2024, reflecting its intent to expand the weapon's reach. The speed, range, and versatility of these missiles mean that vessels operating in the West Philippine Sea now face the possibility of being tracked and engaged from land long before they can respond. Getting these systems into place was a complex undertaking. BrahMos is not simply a missile. It is a system that includes wheeled launchers, command and control vehicles, radars, and maintenance units. In 2025, deliveries to the Philippines required multiple transport flights and extended technical assistance. Indian advisors worked closely with local forces to integrate the system into coastal defenses. Philippine units trained for months under Indian guidance, practicing deployment from mobile launch trucks designed to shift positions quickly, avoiding the vulnerability of fixed batteries. Road and base upgrades near Palawan and Luzon were required to support such mobility, enabling dispersal and concealment until the system is activated. Manila's goal was clear: not to present a static target for China, but to keep enough unpredictability that Beijing must assume the weapons could appear suddenly wherever they are most effective. For India, this cooperation has been as much about political presence as about exporting hardware. Indian personnel embedded in the project serve not just as trainers, but as representatives of New Delhi's stake in the region. Uniformed advisors at Philippine bases send an unmistakable message that India is not only selling equipment, but shaping how it is fielded. Through BrahMos, New Delhi signals that it supports Manila's resistance to expansive Chinese claims and that deterrence in the South China Sea is no longer a U.S.-led monopoly. From Beijing's perspective, the implications are obvious. Until now, China's maritime strategy in the West Philippine Sea has balanced mainly against the Philippines' small navy and coast guard and the shifting reliability of U.S. presence. An Indian-supplied missile system creates a new layer of deterrence that China cannot simply wait out. These missiles are not tied to U.S. politics or deployments. They are Philippine-owned and will remain in local hands regardless of external changes. For China, that means a recurring obstacle that complicates plans to intimidate or blockade Filipino forces near Scarborough Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal. Vietnam has also shown strong interest in BrahMos. While Hanoi has not yet received deliveries, its military relationship with India is growing, and officials have openly signaled their desire for the system. If Vietnamese coastal units were eventually equipped, covering approaches near the Spratly or Paracel Islands, China's southern flank would be encircled by multiple pockets of Indian-backed missile coverage. Even if each battery is limited in number, the distributed presence would multiply the risk to Chinese task groups. In maritime conflict, perception often matters as much as capability. The knowledge that any patrol could come within range of supersonic land-based missiles forces adversaries to move more cautiously, undermining their sense of dominance. Measured against the scale of China's People's Liberation Army Navy, the Philippines and Vietnam remain negligible in conventional strength. China fields more destroyers, frigates, submarines, and carriers than all its Southeast Asian neighbors combined. Yet naval balance is more than tonnage. A single successful strike against a destroyer or amphibious ship could equate to billions in losses and a profound political shock. The BRAMOS represents this latent threat, small in numbers, large in consequence. Beijing knows that the risk of high-profile damage, even from one launch, cannot be discounted, and this changes how it must plan operations in disputed waters. For Manila, the system delivers something it has never possessed before, a credible deterrent that extends well beyond its coastline. The Philippines may still lack a blue water navy, but now holds the ability to threaten larger adversaries within its EEZ. This is not permanent balance against China, but it increases deterrent options that were absent only a year ago. The hope for Manila is not to win a naval showdown, but to create enough risk to compel Beijing to think twice before escalating. India's calculus is equally careful. Supplying BRAMOS demonstrates credibility as a security provider without overcommitting. Unlike the United States, New Delhi is not anchoring permanent forces in the region. Instead, it exports a capability that Southeast Asian states can maintain themselves while retaining influence through training, sustainment, and upgrades. This builds durable relationships without tying India down to permanent basing agreements. The symbolism of commitment combines with practical, long-term leverage. Within ASEAN, the deployment has created both reassurance and unease. Some states see it as a positive step, showing that external powers other than the US are willing to help them resist Chinese coercion. Others worry that the introduction of supersonic missiles raises the danger of incidents escalating faster than before. Even without launches, the presence of advanced weapons in fragile waters makes any encounter more charged. Inside the bloc, the BRAMOS is therefore not just a Philippine asset, but also a regional signal that security dynamics are shifting. For China, the presence of BRAMOS means that maritime operations once considered routine now carry higher stakes. Supply lines to its artificial islands in the Spratlys could theoretically be targeted. Patrols near disputed reefs must assume new risks. The weapons mobility means China cannot know where batteries are hidden, adding uncertainty to every deployment. The result is neither outright deterrence nor dramatic rebalancing, but a raised strategic cost that narrows Beijing's options. Ultimately, the system delivers different payoffs to each of its stakeholders. For Manila, it is a deterrent against harassment. For India, it confirms a new role as a regional defense partner with influence inside the South China Sea. For Beijing, it is a fresh layer of complications that cannot be wished away. And for Southeast Asia as a whole, it shifts the calculations of both risk and opportunity in dealing with the region's largest power. The missiles themselves are unlikely to ever be used unless diplomacy collapses. Yet their presence already changes patrol routes, negotiation strategies, and naval exercises. They embody defense cooperation and deterrence in a way few other measures could. That is the subtle but lasting weight of Indian-made weapons in contested waters. But while New Delhi sharpens military partnerships and introduces hard assets to China's doorstep, another dimension of strategy looms large. Weapons may guard maritime claims, yet trade routes and markets still underpin India's economic strength. And navigating those ties is its own kind of battlefield, the one defined not by missiles, but by dependence and competition. The trade triangle, India, China, and the US-India's wider strategic picture, is shaped not only by weapons and deployments, but also by the flows of trade that bind it to the very powers it seeks to balance. This is where the so-called trade triangle between India, China, and the United States defines the limits of New Delhi's freedom of action. The contradiction is clear. India and China maintain extensive bilateral trade, making Beijing one of New Delhi's largest overall partners, even as Indian ships and missiles appear in waters China claims. India imports vast quantities of electronics, solar equipment, industrial machinery, and chemicals essential for pharmaceutical production. Exports to China, by comparison, remain narrow, largely raw materials such as iron, ore, and agricultural goods. The pattern leaves India dependent on critical Chinese inputs for its high-growth industries, despite rising political and military friction. In parallel, the United States stands as India's most important export market. American demand absorbs software, outsourced IT services, pharmaceuticals, and expanding categories of manufactured goods. Each relationship offers opportunities, but together they present a structural problem. Military deterrence rests on a foundation the economy alone cannot secure. In blunt terms, India seeks deterrence at sea but still needs imports, from semiconductors to chemicals, that originate in or pass through China. The reliance on U.S. markets brings its own complications. India has benefited from billions in service exports, sustaining entire sectors of employment in Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and other hubs of software engineering. Yet policy volatility in Washington creates regular disruptions. In recent years, U.S. tariff disputes resurfaced, with steel, digital services, and certain manufactured goods all facing threatened or actual levies. These measures often fluctuated with America's election cycles, producing an atmosphere of uncertainty. For New Delhi, this means a basic vulnerability. Even as the U.S. anchors a growing defense partnership, commercial access can tighten or loosen depending on domestic American politics. Tariff pressure in 2024 and the continuing threat of new restrictions in 2025 show why India remains cautious about leaning too heavily on any one market. Against China, the